Hi everyone,
Hey, Jayesh, loud and clear, we can hear you.
all the audience for this panel. Great, thanks, Jayesh. So in the previous panel discussions, we tried to understand the needs of Indian rural households. We talked about the role of policy for rural livelihoods, and now the stage is all set to understand the rapidly growing space of agri innovation and the opportunities associated with it. And we have a stellar panel lined up for an insightful discussion, which will be moderated by Nipun Mehrotra, who was the Chief Digital Officer IBM India till 2019, leading IBM's thrust on digital platforms and innovation. He is presently the co-founder of the Agri Alliance for Innovation, a volunteer-driven, not-for-profit think and do tank. Its mission is to reposition India as a leading agricultural innovator globally by 2030 by strengthening the public-private foundation of collaborative agricultural innovation and leveraging an open agri platform. I think the panelists are all here, the moderator is here, and we are all set to have a very insightful discussion. Over to you, Nipun.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Nudge, for having me. I'm truly delighted to be hosting a very diverse panel on agricultural innovation at this Agri Charcha, and I love the name. And I will introduce them in just a minute, the moment I set the stage on agri innovation, which, as I think everyone would agree, is absolutely critical to kickstart not only the overall Indian economy, but more importantly, for the health of agriculture, a sector that really consumes a bulk of India's natural resources. 90% of the water, 46% of the land, half our labor force is engaged in agriculture in some form, but yet contributes about 13 to 14% only of the country's GDP. So innovation is certainly needed across the board, and it also needs to go deep, cutting through sometimes what are the nice to do areas into those that are must do, which could have exponential, wholesome impact on the farmer income, but also on sustainability of the sector. So an innovation ecosystem needs broadly three things to thrive. One is a lot of patient capital, and especially in the context of agriculture, you need a lot of patient capital with a 10-year, 15-year, 20-year kind of a time window. Thoughtful incubation by experienced agriculturalists. And finally, you need sustained market access. I think all of them are necessary to grow agri-innovation. So in this context, we have a fantastic panel balanced across all aspects of this innovation ecosystem that I just outlined, but also delighted that we could balance that across the public and the private sectors as well. So let me briefly introduce my co-panelists, starting with Ritu. Ritu Verma is the co-founder and the managing partner at Ankur Capital. It's a VC firm investing in innovation and disruptive agri-technologies, and they have funded minimum 12, maybe more, of India's leading ag-tech startups that are making a huge difference to Indian agri. Some of the really big names. Ritu is also part of the founding team of Think Ag, which is a young organization recently set up to help to create an agri sector platform that is helping scale innovations in India. It's nice to see VCs focused on agri, and very happy to have you join this panel, Ritu.
Thank you, Nipun.
Ramanathan is the mission director of the Atal Innovation Mission, AIM as it's called, a flagship national innovation initiative under the Niti Aayog. He has been instrumental in the launch of over 60 incubators, of which 2/3 are in the second tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Launching community incubation centers now in partnerships with the private sector, where they plan to involve the local community, and they have frankly done a wonderful job with the hundreds of tinkering labs in the school. There are many other things that AIM does, but let me stop there for the moment. But Ramnan, your experience in incubation and particularly given your past background in a private sector company as well, would be wonderful to bring to this panel in terms of how does public and private partnerships thrive and what should we do in the realm of agriculture. So very delighted you could make it. Mr. Jayesh Ranjan, Principal Secretary, Industries and Commerce and Information Technology Departments, Government of Telangana. Jayesh is an IAS officer from the 1992 batch serving in Telangana, works in the field of developing policy frameworks and attracting new investments and promoting and utilizing IT for the digital empowerment of citizens. Under his leadership, Telangana has done tremendous work, and I have personally had an opportunity to experience some of that in promoting innovation in agriculture, especially using data, supporting startups, pushing new ideas, and most importantly, helping implement programs. I mean, that ultimately is the crux of driving any innovation agenda forward. So, Jayesh, thank you for joining us. Your experience in providing market access will be absolutely vital for this conversation. Finally, we have Anil Kumar, founder and CEO of Samunnati. And Anil is a career banker with 28 years of experience in the areas of rural, retail, and agri banking, and creating capacity for financially excluded markets. In 2014, he's founded Samunnati, that offers financial and non-financial solutions to marginal, small and medium farmers, agricultural enterprises and wholesalers, retailers, etc. And absolutely delighted that Samunnati was awarded the Economic Times Social Enterprise of this year, 2020, a few months back. So Anil, congratulations on that award and your work in providing farm credit to lakhs of farmers, and especially in strengthening the FPO access in terms of providing farm credit is so critical. So thank you for joining this discussion, and you are the only ag startup on the panel. So your feedback and your views will help us, provide some reality to our discussions.
Sure, thank you.
So welcome all the panelists once again, and as you all see, we have a very experienced set of leaders, as I said earlier, between the private and public access, and functionally across investment to incubation to market access, and then building an ag startup, right? So I look forward to learning from them, as well as helping the audience have a stimulating conversation. We will, through the next 1 hour or so, also showcase a few ag startups through short videos, and I would encourage the audience to continuously engage and post comments and questions. We will try and take your questions through the session and not at the end, right? Now, some issues and two or three broad issues that we will be deliberating collectively is taking their individual experiences as an investor, as an incubator, etc. But taking the individual experiences, but then blending them together for the purpose of driving conversation in the panel. The first issue that I want to take up with all of them is really how do we fund, incubate, and provide market access to agri startups that work in vital areas like sustainability, lowering water usage in agri, preserving soil health, etc. And there are many, many other areas, right? So at this moment, what I'm going to do is to request Ritu to maybe walk us through for a few minutes on an excellent report which Think Ag has created, and then we'll come back to this question and then we'll debate that amongst the panel. So Ritu, can I turn this over to you now?
Yeah, thank you, Nipun. And I'm going to share my screen to walk you through some of the findings that we've had at Think Ag here. So just give me a second, yeah? My screen? Yeah, cool.
Yep, we can see the charts. Yeah, now we can see everything.
Yeah, you can see everything. Excellent. All right. So thanks a lot for this opportunity. I think I just perhaps maybe just start off with a little bit of a background on what we were trying to do with this report. I think as Nipun mentioned, ThinkAg is actually exists, it's a not-for-profit, it exists to help accelerate innovations in the food and agri sector and try to make a larger impact on the on a sector which as we all know is a super important sector for India here. So this report is sort of intended to say, take stock of look what's happening, both from an innovation as well as an investment perspective. And it was one of the first of its kind to get into very quantitatively as well as qualitatively to take a look what has happened over the 5 years. And it is intended to be an annual report updating and, keeping everyone abreast of sort of what keeps happening in this landscape here, right? So for starters, it is a thriving ecosystem. There's over 600 new ag techs that are being, and they're growing every day. So this is this is a little bit dated. We are at the end of the year. So a lot of new ag tech startups are happening. Over the past 5 years, about close to $2 billion have been invested in this sector. Check sizes are fairly large, lots of transactions. And not the least, about 14 million farmers are interacting or being benefited from ag tech innovations that have been happening. So that's all super exciting, right? And you see how over the 4 years, investments have just been growing, and at 2019 closed out at about $650 million. So quite a bit of money is been flowing into the sectors, both I would say into new innovations as well as older ones that are maturing and actually attracting larger amounts of capital. So that's a good thing. Investors are, happy, and these innovations are maturing to scale to attract that much capital. So that's something that we see happening, and it's not unlike what's happening globally. You see similar trends, and agtech has been a trend globally. And I will talk a little bit more about sort of what are the things behind, what are the wins behind agtech in India, and why we think that will continue. These trends will sort of continue here, right? So just briefly on that, right? I think the report found 3 learnings, and this is a mixture of sort of looking at what's happening from innovators, looking at where money is flowing, but also from a lot of qualitative conversations with the stakeholders in the ecosystem, both corporates and government and NGOs. Alike across the ecosystem here, right? And what you see happening here is that there is demand on the front end is changing. So innovations are being sort of developed to sort of, address that demand on the front side. There's also a digital penetration that has happened that can cover, a large swath of the country, allowing a lot of these innovations to happen. And on the physical side, there are new technologies, whether they are from the bio side, whether they are in terms of precision instruments, etc., that are coming on board that can address some of the inefficiencies that are present today in our chains. But this particular slide that I have up here basically points to the fact that the majority of the capital has flown in from the consumer, the consumption side, right? So whether it is, how food actually and how the consumer is interacting and buying or sourcing food, or whether it is, institutional, how are those market linkages being built? So the lion's share, 3/4 of it, is in that sector, what we call downstream ag tech. The rest of the capital is kind of spread over the other sectors. The one that sees the least is in the biotech space. And I think that's pretty nascent, and that's probably a bit of a larger ecosystem issue than just an ag issue as to how more money goes into the biotech here, right? You see bunch of money going into ag fintech. I think we have one of the most exciting startups here. I don't know if I can call you a startup anymore, Anil, but Samunnati here, and I'm sure you'll hear more about that. You see capital going into what I was talking about, alluding to earlier, technology that can help with precision agriculture. You see, again, money going into innovations that are targeting how inputs and, seeds, etc., make it down to the last mile to the farmer, and also on automation tools, etc., that are here, right? And, and technology and software stuff that is out there, right? But smaller amounts of money for sure. And I think the report had two learnings from this that which I'll come to shortly as well. Let me just tell you who's playing out here. What's interesting is that a large amount of money that is coming in here is actually coming from very generalist investors who are comfortable coming into agri. So that's a super positive thing to hear. It's not that there are some very specialized folks, but a lot of very generalists are gung ho about this sector. And, this is something you see globally as well. So, that's a positive for what's happening in ag and ag innovations here, right? What you do see is that a lot of money is going into very, and this is very typical of most industries, so it's nothing, alarming or any such thing, that, money crowds behind things that are growing and scaling. And of course, the larger checks go towards that. So, ag is no different. The things that have matured have attracted much more capital. But the one thing that you do see happening here is that innovations are taking a bit longer to scale. So you see smaller checks in the same companies getting written round after round because perhaps the product market fits or the scale demonstration that is necessary for a lot more money to come in isn't kind of happening. So one learning here is that, look, innovations are taking longer for adoption in the market. And, there are things to be done on that. And that was sort of the thesis behind which ThinkAg anyway, began its journey, saying how do we get stuff out there as soon as we possibly can. Yeah. Another interesting thing that you see happening here is that India is actually creating different business models. So when we can talk about innovations in products or technology, etc., that's happening, but there's also business model innovations that are happening that are not only relevant for the Indian context, but I would argue relevant for a much larger globe where there is small farmer farming, like the B2B2F models that have kind of emerged. There's also a need in India for full stack models, so you'll see those coming up because there are ecosystem. It's not that there are ecosystem players in different parts and there's a missing gap. Mostly, it's a gap all the way around. So you see people doing a lot of different things to address those kind of gaps here. So different business models are also kind of emerging and partially driven by the market structure that ag actually plays in here, right? Last but not the least, there's a lot of incubators, there are a lot of accelerators, and these can divide up into two types. Some which are very agri-focused, like a NARM at AIDEA or a Indigram, that are focusing purely on agri-tech startups. But there is a lot of also general incubators that are incubating agri startups. This is a positive, right? Because the ecosystem is viewing ag as something that can happen and is supporting it over and above other options that they might have, right? Without having the stated purpose of saying that I will just support ag innovations here. People are bullish about ag, so that's a very exciting thing. I think that we've already seen how much money has come in, but more money is coming in. People want to invest in this sector, and when the report comes out next year, you'll see that this year, despite COVID, has actually been a very exciting and interesting year as to how money has actually come into this sector. There've been tailwinds in this sector as opposed to headwinds, and so that's been a good thing to drive a lot of adoption here. The people who have been a bit more skittish are corporates, right? And, so you don't typically globally in agriculture, you see a lot of corporates participating in innovations. In India, that's still not quite there. And that's one of the things that we've been kind of going after to say, how do we get, the existing ecosystem to also engage with innovations in a more meaningful way here. So that's sort of the, touch from the ground here as to what people are thinking. So our view is with a lot of, with all of these different just
Let's wait for her to come back. Hey, Utsav. Yeah. Hey, Ritu, I don't know whether it's just me, but we lost you for the last 30 seconds.
I think we have lost her again now. Connectivity seems to be a little patchy. Nipun.
Yep.
Not.
It's not. I'm not the only one who's struggling, apparently. But I think while we wait for Ritu to come back, I think she makes some very interesting points. Not enough investment in the deep areas, and I kind of preempted that the question that I asked, but not enough investments in deep areas. We know that 65% of investments and incubation coming in from generalists. Now, she did say that's a good thing, and frankly, any money is good money. But in some ways, a little bit of specialization is also probably needed, and we'll touch upon that as we go to Jayesh and all of you. In terms of what is the role that agri and domain specific skills play in the success of startups, right? And then she said not too many corporates are coming into this sector. And then she was saying something for a few seconds, which we couldn't make out. So while we wait for her to come back, and maybe we'll question her on a couple of those thoughts. Jayesh, if I turn it over to you, having heard from Ritu on what is happening from an investment standpoint, but given your vantage point, seeing so many innovative startups, what do you think we can do collectively to encourage more agtech startups in these deeper areas? Professor Vijay Raghavan in the morning spoke about the need for startups and innovation in soil health, in conserving water. Ritu spoke about biotech. Only 1% of the money goes into biotech, right? Artificial proteins as an example. So your thoughts, Jayesh, given your vantage point as somebody who's been really very encouraging to startups.
Thank you, Nipun. Good afternoon, fellow panelists. Greetings to all the attendees. So, Nipun, I would like to make a couple of points. While I'll do answer your question, but I'll also try to share a little bit of a backstory about Telangana's work with agtech startups. So, as you know, we have gone through a very difficult period during this pandemic, the lockdown, etc. Industries were closed, IT offices faced lots of restrictions. But there was one very important silver lining, which was the performance of the agriculture sector. And today, in a state like Telangana, we don't see rural distress at all, given the fact that literally for 6 months, everything was shut down, etc. We do not see rural distress at all. In fact, we see, on the contrary, prosperity in many pockets is only because we allowed agriculture operations to run seamlessly without any roadblocks, etc. And we did tremendously well. In fact, you will be amazed to know that our rice production, the production figures increased by 42% over last year. And this year, FCI, as you know, they procure nationally 63% of the rice production came from one state alone, which is Telangana. So a little bit of backstory about it, that in fact, our government has also realized that this is a very important sector, also a neglected sector, and therefore we need to do multiple things. So if you want really agri-tech to be promoted, nurtured, supported, help them get market access, etc., all of that needs to be driven by a larger vision on where do you place agriculture per se in your state priorities or in your government's priorities. So again, you will be pleasantly surprised to know that in Telangana, 30% of the state budget goes to agriculture and related support activities. And if you look at how this 30% money is spent, it is spent, of course, on pricing, which, as you know, has become a very contentious issue. So pricing support takes lots of part of that budget. We also provide lots of infrastructure support. State has invested a lot in major irrigation projects, minor irrigation tanks, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, we provide, we were the first state, incidentally, to start a direct benefit transfer of 10,000 rupees per acre to the farmer, which now is a part of the national, the whole country now replicates it. But it all started here in Telangana. And of course, we do give a strong insurance support also. But the fourth pillar of support which our government provides is knowledge support. And this is where innovation, agri-tech startups play a very important role. See, while improving productivity, improving production is definitely a very important goal, but there is a larger goal under which these goals get subsumed, which in our state is to double farmers' income. As you know, this has been a national priority for a long, long time. Not just the present government in Delhi, but the government before them also used to speak a lot about how one should look at doubling farmers' income. So in Telangana, the way we are looking at agtech startups is that what are the gaps where we feel that making some effort or putting some intervention will help achieve that objective of doubling farmers' income. So we have taken a complete crop cycle approach, right from the planning stage when you do, for example, crop planning, and then you do irrigation management, nutrient management, when you take care of pests, when you do this harvesting, when you take it to the market, and so on and so forth. So at every stage, what are the interventions possible? So the approach that we have taken is that for all these stages across the crop cycle, we have invited startups to give their proposals. I mean, if you have a ready to deploy solution which can be productively tried out. So we were very fortunate that we received proposals from 83 startups, who between them gave us 90 plus solutions. And as I said, these cover the entire chain across the crop cycle. And what we have done is that we have a very good ally in the form of the State Agriculture University. So the State Agriculture University has decided to give opportunities in all its field stations and research stations to demonstrate these solutions. So in the current cropping season, 12 of these startups are demonstrating their solutions, and there are plans to deploy more and more of these solutions over the coming startup season. And once we are confident that the solution works, then these will be scaled up, and there is enough budget, etc., which the state has, and the state startup policy also supports this. So the point which I'm trying to make is that the whole approach has to be completely demand driven. Which are the pain points which the farmers face? Which are the points due to which, where there are deficiencies due to which farmers are not able to realize the objective of getting better prices, and therefore they are far away from this goal of doubling farmers' income. And once we are able to precisely identify those positions, we definitely would be able to give them opportunities to scale throughout the state, bring corporate partnership. The university partnership is already there. So I'm slightly flipping the model which Ritu spoke about. Corporate definitely and VC funding definitely will come, but that will have to wait for the state to demonstrate that these startup solutions are worth adopting and worth scaling up. So the first responsibility is with us, so to say.
So Jayesh, that's fascinating, and the fact that you're taking a holistic approach is truly encouraging. You brought out one point which I really liked, which is the fact that you're closely associating the work that you're doing with the agri universities, right? And therefore bringing in domain skills, which I think intuitively, I think we'll all agree that just techie skills is not enough to make a change in agriculture. You need domain skills, and therefore to pair them up, and many of the techies who do not have enough agricultural background or experience. So the only way we can rapidly scale this up is by collaboration, by pairing organizations together. So I like what you're saying. Is that a model, do you think, Jayesh, that could be scaled across the country? Is there a way that, and I'll turn it over to Ramanan after that, because as he rolls out incubators, is that something that could be done nationally with Niti Aayog's help?
Yes, of course. So as I alluded earlier, the direct benefit transfer program, which was started in Telangana, is now a national role model. It has been rolled out throughout the country. We have done something else this time. It has not been talked about much because these are early days, but I'm sure that this will also become a very important policy intervention in the country, which is what we call regulated farming. See, all of us are involved in some way or the other with agriculture and the whole range of agriculture activities. We all face this problem of lack of remunerative prices. In fact, every year in some part of the country or the other, including in Telangana, we face this scenario, this very sad scenario, that hundreds of farmers bring their produce to the streets and just dump it on the streets because there are no prices for them. In fact, they've spent much more than what they are getting in return. And obviously there is a demand supply issue because of which they do not get that. So our government has started, again, I'm sure you will be raising this topic of data driven or data set driven agtech solutions, but I'm kind of preempting that point, that this regulated farming has been introduced for the very first time. So for instance, our analysis shows that maize, which is a common crop, commonly grown crop in Telangana, will not be remunerative in the coming harvest season, because lots of imports have happened, other states have raised their production, and so on and so forth. And because we have been able to install a discipline of around this regulated farming, an area which typically would consume 10 lakh acres of maize has been brought down this year to 2 lakh acres. So in Telangana, only 2 lakh acres of maize has been cultivated in the current season, and rest of the area has been diverted to other potential crops like red gram and horticulture, so on and so forth, which definitely will be much more remunerative. So again, a good experiment behind which is lots of data and science and technology.
Wonderful, Jayesh. But if you could come back to that agri thing, because look, I think, and we've all experienced that, we have 150 million farmers. We have such a large dependence on farming that even if we have a great experiment in one part of the country, unless it scales nationally, it does not provide the benefit that we are all looking for, right, to the economy. So this agri university idea that you had, is there any feedback from you? Is there any suggestion from you on what could be done nationally?
So the scale which a state offers is also quite large. So, I mean, while Telangana is a bifurcated state, it is by no means a small state. In fact, if you rank all the states in the country, I guess we would be somewhere in the top 50. So the size, the acreage that we offer, that is a very reasonably large scale to prove or to test a concept, to test the proof of any concept on that scale. And I'm very sure that the kind of work that we do will get noticed. In fact, the initiatives in various other sectors also in Telangana have been emulated. And if the Agriculture University, of course, is also connected with various other national institutions. In fact, I wanted to speak of it later, but let me kind of just take...
I'll bring you on, Jayesh. We'll get...
One very quick point. So we have started a program which is called, amongst various technology interventions that we see in agri, there are a large number of ones which are powered by artificial intelligence. So this is a whole new kind of a ball game altogether. So we have started a program which is called AI for AI, Artificial Intelligence for Agriculture Innovation, with the partnership of the World Economic Forum. And the work which we do, and again, the Agriculture University and IIIT of Hyderabad are associated with it. But obviously the WEF platform, the World Economic Forum platform, will definitely take the achievements and results pretty far and wide.
Wonderful, Jayesh. And I like the word AI for AI. If you have not patented it, we'll probably try and spread that word, Jayesh. But Ramanathan, if I can come to you on the same theme, right? How do we really, and Ritu, we lost you for a few seconds, and I'll come back to you back onto your report as well. But we are really debating from everyone on how do we, not only from our individual vantage point, but really collectively as a group, encourage startups to get into some of the areas that you mentioned is not happening. Sustainability, water usage. I mentioned the Dr. Vijay Raghavan in the morning also raised the same issue. So Ramanathan, with the work that you are doing with incubation, with setting up incubators, and I know you're thinking about domain-specific incubators as well. Your thoughts, Ramanathan?
Yeah, thank you, Nipun. And I think we have had some wonderful comments from both Jayesh as well as Ritu, who have sort of in a very comprehensive manner said what are the areas in which agri-tech incubators are and startups are coming up, and also how the states are playing an important role. At the Atal Innovation Mission, actually we have been quite deeply engaged in seeing how we can create this ecosystem of innovation and entrepreneurship across the country. And when we talk about that, we are really talking about the length and breadth of our country, not just the 8 tier 1 cities that we have, but we have 650,000 villages, we have 715 districts, 115 of them are still aspirational districts, And we have 4,800 small towns and cities, not just 8 tier 1 cities. So how do we, and most of them, 50%, according to what Ritu had shared, is agri-economy based population. At the same time, we are also having challenges of how do we ensure that the ecosystem of entrepreneurship is promoted across in all these places, because as the Honorable Prime Minister has been saying, if we want India to be Atmanirbhar Bharat, we need to ensure that the pillar of infrastructure is set up everywhere, whether it is in the tier 2, tier 3 cities, rural India, coastal India, and the tribal districts and so on. So Atal Innovation Mission is having two major issues that we are tackling. One, creating this problem solving and innovative mindset in our young students, because that's the demographic dividend we all enjoy. 65% of our country is under 35 years old. And how do you spur them on to become entrepreneurs, and how do you spur them on to become innovators? And we become a nation of also job creators, not just job seekers. And if you want to do that, we want to ensure that they are empowered with the knowledge as well as the usage of technology, which is becoming affordable, accessible, available, and advanced. And all of these technologies like 3D printing, robotics, IoT, electronics, and augmented virtual reality or automation is in a sweeping manner changing the way you are able to address many of the problems that you have always had. And now with the increasing data that is coming through sensor technologies, as well as through the convergence with AI, you have a tremendous possibility of now developing very powerful decision support systems that can help the problems of the agri community, the rural communities, and so on. So in Atal Innovation Mission, incubators, there are, I won't talk about the tinkering labs, which is really to create the promote this culture of innovation in our young school students, because they are after all going to become the innovators of tomorrow. And if they come to the universities, how do they find an ecosystem to support them? But first create this problem solving mindset in the young students. So that's what the tinkering labs is all about. And I should say it has been a fantastic ride for all the schools and for all the school students. Today we have more than 5 million students getting exposed to agri challenges. I just want to highlight this one, because whenever we are launching challenges for the tinkering marathons or the tinkering fests and so on, we have aligned all our challenges with sustainable development goals. And if you're talking of sustainable development goals, then you need to be aware that water management is a problem, that housing management is a problem, that sanitation and waste management is a problem, which we need to deal with. And how do you leverage technology for all of that? So there is, not surprisingly, tremendous interest in agri-tech related innovations that young students at the school level are creating. So they, in Thoothukudi, a girls' school, which is in the coastal districts of Tamil Nadu, they created a solar panel IoT-based irrigation management system for the farmers of that district. And why? Because most of their parents are farmers, and they encounter this problem on a day-to-day basis. How do you increase the water management, better the water management, and so on and so forth? So that's one part. But through the incubators, which is the next initiative, we have launched close to 102 incubators across the country, out of which 70 are fully operational, and more than 1,600 startups are operational. But what has been amazing is, out of these 70 plus incubator which are operational, almost 20 to 24 are having strong agri focus in their startups. And when we launch incubators, we ask them that have a primary area of focus which you think has tremendous potential for the startups, and which you are able to also bring to light because of the local environment in which you are located. And most of our incubators, we actually stressed on having in tier 2, tier 3 cities, and every one of them have agri bells surrounding them. So it was not so surprising that we found that many incubators had a very important component of them as promoting agri startups. Now, agri startups are very exciting area for many. Because of what technology can do in terms of precision agriculture, in terms of supply chains, in terms of biotech technologies that can get integrated. It actually gives, you are leveraging satellite technology, you're leveraging AI technology, you're leveraging drone technologies, You are leveraging sensor technologies like IoT. So this is a very exciting area for young engineers or young innovators who are coming out, because they see an opportunity of leveraging these technologies for creating new startups that can improve farm productivity, create digital supply chains, cold storage solutions, etc., and all that. So what you would be very surprised to know is, out of the 1600 plus startups, we have close to about 150 of them as pure agri-tech startups, and this is just in the last 2.5 years. The second thing that we did was we launched innovation challenges called Atal New India Challenges, which we worked along with the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Water, Drinking Water and Sanitation, and so on, because we wanted to find innovations and drive innovations in these areas which are very relevant to our country. And we launched 24 such challenges, out of which we selected 52 winners. And almost out of these 52, there were 22 of them who were agri-tech, again, winners. And they had something to do with the agri industry. It could be water related, it could be supply chain related, all those other things that we talked about. So that we have done is, we have launched community innovation centers across the country, as you are aware.
Ramnan, if I can interrupt you for a minute, and we'll come back to the community the incubators that you are getting into. But it's very encouraging that, as you said, out of the 1600 startups, 10%, 150 of them are in agri. Of them, I hope a number of them are getting into some of the more difficult and the sustainable areas. Ritu's report at the moment doesn't seem to suggest that, but maybe as the report comes out next year, hopefully there's a movement in that direction, right? But truly, if out of the 70 incubators, 20-25 are agri-focused, that means you are building in the domain skills that are probably necessary. I would be curious, given that Jayesh is here, do you have incubators in Telangana?
Yeah, we have.
Right.
And I think two of the incubators are very, ALEAP is an agri-focused incubator. And then we have ALC, Access Livelihood Consulting, which is having an agri-focused incubator. And then we have two others which have,
Good. So I'm assuming that they are also involved in the work that Jayesh spoke about in terms of encouraging startups and really are front and center of.
I think Jayesh and Atal Innovation Mission are all one, because he is involved in all the AIM related activities and promotes them much more actively than we do from here.
He told me that yesterday when I spoke to him. But moving on, Ramnan, and we'll come back to you. Clearly, incubation is a big area. Ritu, I have two issues for you. And by the way, I did attempt.
Before you go, I just want to make one point, because you asked me that right at the beginning. And the point is, in all our incubators and all the community innovation centers that we have implemented, we have actually selected them based upon partnership with the private sector. If they don't bring partnership with the private sector, they don't get a chance to actually set up an incubator or
I'm going to come back to that topic. I think that's a very relevant thing that you're bringing up, and that's a very relevant issue. But please hold for a few minutes. I will come back on that topic, which is, I think, very core to driving agri innovation in India, right? And truly scaling it, not just creating it, but really scaling it. So Ritu, I did attempt to, in a small way, try and capture a few points that you made. The fact that most of the startups are not deep, etc., but also the fact that you brought out that 65% of the incubators are generalists, and 65% of the investors and incubators are kind of generalists. Now, you did say that's a good thing, and any money is good, but there is also a need for domain specific specialization as well. Do you agree? Do you not agree? What is your thinking on that side? Because that's where Ramanathan is headed, which is, to bring in the domain specializations. I'd like to get your thoughts, Ritu, on that one. The second topic, which I'd like you to touch upon, is how do we fund specific manufacturing startups, not necessarily digital? For example, farm mechanization, our penetration of farm mechanization in India is barely at 40% compared to 80% plus for Brazil and 65% for China, as an example. And China has the same small holding issue that India has, right? So how does the funding for somebody who wants to come up with a good manufacturing innovation get visibility with the venture capital world. Ritu, over to you.
Thank you, Nipun. I'm sorry, the internet gods were not on my side today. It seems like not sure where I dropped off, right? But let me answer the two sets of questions that you've asked here, right? And that, the 65, of course, there are gaps of what is being funded in Agri and what is not being funded. I would caveat that by saying that, look, there are different kinds of funding. This is talking about equity funding primarily here. So, there is funding that happens which are beyond this whole piece, right? This lens was on scale, and scale typically is driven by equity in how some of that piece happens, right? Now, coming back to your question here on sort of the 65% are generalist, I'm of the view that that's amazing, right? Because, somebody very unbiased. We all love the sectors we are in. We all love what we do, and we get wedded to it, and we're not looking at it necessarily all the time objectively. What I really like about the fact that 65% are generalists is that someone who has an option of, putting it into like, I don't know, fashion, right, is just making the decision to say, no, I will put my money here, or I will support as an incubator, I will support the startup that is coming in agri-tech, right? And I think that is what I think gives the sector robustness, which is a good thing to have. The second point I will make is that when you're part either as a portfolio or as an incubation portfolio, there's a lot of cross learnings that happen. And those cross learnings are very, very critical, right? And these are critical in terms of like just thinking outside the box of how you build and taking new ideas from other sectors and applying them to another sector, right? Now, this is not to say that you don't need domain expertise. I mean, you can't build a business without domain expertise. That's true of any business, right? And so you have to, as an entrepreneur, you have to get the domain expertise in. You yourself are not coming with it, right? Your team has to put that in, right? But I think the cross-fertilization is actually a good thing, in my opinion. Yeah.
Before you go to the farm question, Ritu, so I agree with you. Having more people jump into the agri sector is wonderful. And I don't know whether you heard Jayesh talk about the partnership that he's trying to establish with the Agri University, which I think is a good model to follow fundamentally, because I think everybody can't be a specialist in everything. So you could be a techie, but you definitely need an agri domain. So you partner with somebody. Now, the question is, can we promote that? Can we come up with policies and programs that actually encourage the universities to partner proactively with an incubator? I was giving the example earlier to someone else, which is that when a research institution in Delhi creates an agri research institution in Delhi creates their own incubator, they really do not know how to support startups. Now, why would they not partner with AIM, or why would they not partner with some other body to work, or with you as an example, Ritu, right? As a VC, but they need to reach out to startups, right? Why does everybody have to create everything from scratch? That was the point that I was on. Right? Yeah.
No, very fair point, Nipun. And I actually think there's a lot of really exciting stuff at the agri universities in India, right? And to get them out there commercially and get them out into the hands of farmers is very, very important, as opposed to sitting there, right? Basically, I'm for that completely. I think coming back to your second question, right, about manufacturing, right, and sort of, so I have a peeve that, like, I think we're scratching the surface of funding agri-tech startups, right? I mean, venture capital at the end of the day is a certain type of money that requires a certain type of scale and growth that not everything can kind of deliver, basically. So I think this is an ecosystem problem for us in India. There is not alternative sources of funding that are look different, right? That can take a look at, smaller enterprises. They're very innovative, doing different things, right? But just don't scale for venture capital the same way, right? That's one part of it, right? And I think the other part of it is I think we lack infra. A lot of these types of companies get funded with venture capital outside India. And as I alluded to in my report, and I'm not sure if that you guys heard that or I broke up before that, some operationally heavy stuff just takes time to grow. And that's because the surrounding ecosystem is full of friction in the Indian context. So growth can't quite happen that fast.
Sure.
Is the problem, right? So I think that's a problem we have to fix for agri. Like, everything can't be about tech, right? I think you have to do stuff on the ground as well, and there have to be physical products, right? That have to be there on the ground to actually help with agriculture. And for us to be imagining and financing these kind of startups differently is the need of the hour.
Right. No, you're right, Ritu, and we'll come back to that when we talk about public and private in the next section. But clearly, we do need to think about how do we fund these startups. I was actually quite amazed, and I'm going to come to Anil and have him talk about having heard all three of you from an investment and from an incubation and from a government market access standpoint. What does he think? But just to wrap up the point on farm mechanization, on those kind of startups, I was actually amazed to learn that out of the double your farmers' income strategy that the country is on, there are 6 pillars. Out of them, 3 pillars are strongly embedded in farm mechanization, right? Productivity improvement, cost of production, and crop density. 3 of them are actually anchored with farm mechanization. When I talk to the farm mechanization folks, they get zero money, they get zero visibility with venture capitalists, they get zero visibility with trying to raise money, those kind of things. So I think we have to tackle some of those fundamental issues as a country and as an ecosystem if you're going to make progress. But Anil, over to you. What do you think is, given the fact that you built a startup and a very successful startup, and Ritu said I probably shouldn't label you a startup anymore. But what do you think is the biggest inhibitor? Is it funding, or is it incubation, or is it market access?
Right. Well, a standard MBA answer. It depends.
Yeah.
It depends on from which perspective that you are looking at, Nipun. So when Samunnati as an idea germinated in 2014, and then I was just coming out of a wonderful experience of building a rural local financial institution model across the country as the group CEO. People were wondering, why the hell are you getting into agri lending? Because most of the people perceived agriculture as a crop loan, where you give money and then the rain gods are not kind to the farmer, and at times the farmer takes the extreme step, bad publicity, and you have lost your money. It took 4 months for me to explain that while that part of agriculture is exposed to rain god, agriculture is not crop loan, agriculture is a sector. And there is a lot of world before and after this particular understanding of what agriculture is. And that was when I actually could land into a couple of agriculture understanding investors at that point in time. The crop is pretty big now, but in 2014, not long ago, it was very few of them who understood what agriculture is. And at that point in time, agriculture as an investment did not have the tailwinds that we are seeing in the last few months. Lot of headwinds, of course. The farm loan waivers and other things were in the horizon. So it had its own dimensions. But what we realized is, once we start understanding that agriculture is a sector and it goes beyond crop loans, is when people started understanding that there is a business proposition that one can build. And that's where Ritu's comment on domain expertise of the team being so critical, because the team that Samunnati put together, and I have spent 20 years of my 28 years in banking experience in rural and agriculture. So once you start articulating as to why a business indeed can be built in agriculture, and be upfront on what are the risks that are associated with agriculture as an activity. So what are the investors looking at? Do you have a business proposition? Do you have the ability to execute? And most importantly, is there a viable model that you are talking about at scale, which is what again Ritu mentioned. So we started explaining that while it is known that agriculture has a huge potential and unmet demand, and there are lot of policy level priorities to focus on agriculture. Being a debit credit man myself, a banker, there is a lot that had to be done on the product structuring, and lot of product structuring in agriculture was with the provider's convenience rather than the farmer at the center of the product design. So we started explaining that we can actually structure products around the activity and start working with them, is when we started articulating what are the risks associated with the cash flows which we are mitigating. And that led to, we realizing that finance is important but not sufficient. You need to be an internal player to be operating in agriculture. While it may be possible for many of the lenders to sit on the fence and operate in other markets, whether it is consumer finance, whether it is housing loan, whether it is corporate lending, SME lending, small business loans, you can sit on the fence and operate. When it comes to agriculture, you have to be in the ring. You have to be an internal player in the value chain, because time and again we started seeing that the biggest driver of risk of default was not having access to markets. Market linkages was significantly playing a role in the delinquencies that we started seeing, and that's when Samunnati embarked on setting up a dedicated subsidiary for market linkages called Samunnati Agro. Then we came with a proposition that while lending is important, it's not sufficient. We will work with you as partners to be able to mitigate the risk of your cash flows, because in a way, that is the risk that I have. If my customer is mitigated of the risk, the repayment risk is mitigated to a significant extent. And that is what led us to look at what are the ways in which a lender's risk to begin with and a market linkages risk to begin with can be mitigated and scaled using a collaborative approach. And Samunnati started looking at which are the entities in the agri ecosystem and startup ecosystem that we can start collaborating on both these dimensions. More importantly, on the market linkages with supply chain companies, and we were fortunate to work with some of the finest entities that have achieved scale now when they were startups. Ritu's slide had all the details. They have Ergos, Way-Cool. They were really small. Of course, we were also very small at that point in time. We grew together as fellow startups, and recently we realized that at that point in time to now we have worked with about 35 startups and deployed about 100 crores. And on 15th of August, in fact, we have launched a technology platform to engage with the startups called Samaram. And from 15th to now, Nipun, we have had about 103 registrations of startups, essentially for 3 services. 1, customized working capital structures for them. 2, access to the FPOs that we work with. We work with more than 500 FPOs on the supply side. Access to the FPOs to deploy their services. And the third requirement is if the user of the service is in need of financial services to buy those products, can customize and design a product for them, right? But stepping back, if I take the Samunnati's perspective of mitigating the risk associated, there are 2 kinds of risks that are significant. One, the risk of end-use monitoring, and second is the risk of production that exists. And both these cannot be managed sitting on the fence. Both have to be managed by being in the ring at the cost of repetition and bringing in. And that is where we see agtech companies playing a significant role. And we at Samunnati have been big beneficiaries of some of the finest incubators that we have been working with and build products together. Some of the monitoring tools that we have brought in using satellite imagery, or the package of practices that we brought in, and so on and so forth. But what it all goes back is we need to keep the farmer at the center. You need to keep the active farming at the center. You cannot have a proposition where I will play my role and expect things to happen on their own, or I will play the role and expect the farmer to do things on his or her own. Not possible. Then you are at the risk. The second dimension of engaging with startups in agri ecosystem is also the need to collaborate. And I heard the bundling as a requirement to be able to add value. On a standalone basis, the service might not be relevant, but only when you add 1 or 2 services together is when it brings a full proposition. While the AI for AI is very, very interesting, the one AI that I'm most familiar with is the AI that has shown significant traction of why a farmer will pay for the service, and if it is providing additional rupee or additional income to her household, which is artificial insemination. If you heard AI, that is one technology where that leads to the cow lactating, and that adds to the income levels of the household, and they don't mind paying 150 rupees to 250 rupees depending on what kind of activity that you would require, and the payment is seamless, and that infrastructure completely works. So most of the work that we need to do in the startup ecosystem is how do we collaborate, and most importantly, look at the farmer at the center and add value to the income levels of the farmers, and the rest of it will become more an ecosystem play. So
Well, Anil, thank you. And I think you brought up some very interesting points, and frankly, you covered it end to end. It's not only, and that was partially a trick question, so it is not meant to be any one of them is the issue. I think all of them are needed. But the fact that, as you explained, a collaborative approach, and the fact that you cannot be sitting on the periphery, you need to be in the center of the business, I think is critical. And the fact that, and I like what you said, keep the farmer at the center. I mean, that's the only way to make sure that you remain relevant, right? There have been a bunch of questions coming in around some of the things that we have discussed. One is on scale. So, for example, and I'm not going to answer them, each one of them, because we attempted to answer them collectively. How do you scale, right? How do you take some of these technologies and scale them? And the second set of questions are in the area of, one is in clean tech and a few other sustainable technologies. So what is the scope of the same currently? And as this is asked by Namita, so as you heard most of the panelists, as you heard Ritu as well, there isn't enough activity happening in some of those areas. But I think, given what Ramanathan said on the incubators, given the need for domain skills and the acceptance of the domain skills, and maybe the agriculture university is one way forward, it doesn't have to be the only way forward. Given some of that, I think we are hopeful that by the time next year or the year after that, we will probably see a huge jump in more startups coming into not only agriculture, but into some of the deeper areas of agriculture, right? And maybe the tinkering labs, Ramanathan, could also become a little more agri-focused at some point in time, because the fact is that students are not coming to agriculture. Agriculture is not a career aspiration of choice, right, for most students at the moment. Let's move on. But Utsav, can you play the two videos we had of Energy Harvest and Intello Labs? This is two videos from startups who I think are doing exactly what we've been talking about, getting into some of the more difficult areas.
Breathing in Delhi's winter is like smoking 50 cigarettes a day. Major cause of this air pollution is burning of stubble in the United States of charcha. Thousands of acres of paddy straw left over after harvesting is burned by farmers to put themselves at risk as they have no choice. They do not have the means to access expensive collection machinery nor a ready market to sell the straw during the short window harvest. I am Sukhneet Singh, and with my co-founder Dr. Robert Mary, started Energy Harvest, which is supported by Aston University and Douglas Fitch Conference. My main is to solve the crop residue burning problem in India. We provide specialized machinery to farmer entrepreneurs to collect straw from nearby villages. Our machine learning model identifies the areas where stubble is standing, enabling quick collection of the straw during the small window between harvests. We then work with the industry to buy the straw to convert into biofuels like pellets or organic fertilizer. Not only does this reduce pollutants in the air and provides green fuel alternatives, but also provide the farmers with an alternate source of income from their waste, thus converting the waste into an opportunity for change. This winter, Energy Harvest is trying to stop 6,000 acres of straw from being burned, helping citizens to breathe easier and helping farmers to earn more.
Utsav, can you play the second one as well?
Did you know 21% of fresh produce gets lost on its way to a shopping cart, while at the same time, 81% of food businesses are unable to meet customer quality expectations? The root cause lies in current quality systems that are subjective, slow, non-scalable, and poorly auditable. Introducing IntelloLabs, a new approach of evaluating fresh produce quality. With the help of imaging technologies and cutting-edge AI, we bring accuracy and standardization at different stages of the food supply chain, such as pack house, distribution center, retail store, or fulfillment center. IntelloLabs works with supermarkets, growers, food processing and food distribution companies to cut down supply chain losses and provide the right quality fresh produce to the end customer. Our quality solutions decrease value risk and wastage in the food supply chains while increasing revenue through maximum customer satisfaction. Our system is customizable and configurable to meet the dynamic requirements of your organization. The end results are optimized with live reporting, analysis, insights, and packed with image proofs to positively transform your farm, warehouse, or retail store. Want to improve and optimize your fresh food quality? Let's talk.
Okay, so moving on to what I think is the next big issue in front of us, which is how can the private sector and the government share the load and make faster progress, right? How do we actually work together more proactively? I did share the example of research sector in the beginning, but there are many other areas as well, right? So, Ranjan, I'm going to ask you, given your experience in the private sector as well, and now having spent time with Niti Aayog, and you were about to talk about the community incubators as well. So not just from a program standpoint, but if you may, Ramanathan, and we have a limited time left, unfortunately, but if you may, give us some suggestions on what could be done structurally.
So, one of the important things and which you have brought to, you have been repeatedly bringing to attention, Nipun, is how do we facilitate this private sector and domain expertise to the startups? Startups are very technology savvy. They know what to do with the software, the hardware, and so on. But they lack this domain experience in various verticals. And therefore, it is very important for us to be able to, have these partnerships developed. So it is very important. So one of the things that we are now insisting is that if you're an agri-tech startup or you're an agri-focused incubator, who is your partner? Which is the university which is focusing on agriculture that you are partnering with? Which is the research institution that you're partnering with? Or which is the private sector that you're partnering with? Who are all these players? Because they will be filling that gap, which is so essential for us to have meaningful startups which can create some impact. The second is the government is actually working very closely to enhance areas of collaboration in specific areas. For example, IBM and Niti Aayog are working together on how can AI be leveraged more effectively and how AI and satellite technology can be leveraged more effectively by particularly for the agri sector. So which means we bring the agri ministry, institutions like ICAR, and then a private sector player like IBM and maybe ISRO. All of these people are coming together in order to envisage solutions that are going to have an impact. So we need to now see there is a lot of work actually happening in research, but it is not getting transformed into applied research. And this farm to fork that we talk about, is not happening because of these research projects which are being funded by government end up just being a research project with a paper being produced and you probably get your PhD or you get your thesis or whatever you're looking out of it. But what we need to do is ensure that we can incentivize applied research, and that means incentivizing professors or scholars, research scholars who would like to probably have the opportunity to have some equity in applying that research into an innovation that can go into the startup world. And when you do that, then you have a good connection between domain expertise, research that has happened, which is meaningful in that area, and a startup which is all bringing the energy of technology knowledge and technology tech savviness into picture. So this is what we do from
Ranjan, I think both those points are very good. I mean, right, and the applied research one, especially the equity one, I think is very refreshing. And if you can push that, if you can create instruments that a startup can use, which are efficient from a financial capital allocation standpoint, and I think it is something that can do well. But and I'm going to keep pushing in the interest of trying to see what can be done collectively to drive 10x the progress that we have done. I mean, I think you and Niti Aayog have done a wonderful job to get to 100 incubators. But for a country with so many districts, so many states, etc., the question is why not 1,000? So what can the balance 900 come from private sector? As an example, I'm not asking you to respond to that right now because it's not fair. But that's the direction which I think we need to be headed towards, at least from in my perspective, at least. Right. Anil, sorry.
While you are talking of the collaboration, private sector collaboration, as well as look at the enormity of what needs to be achieved. Collaborating at an entity level is one dimension. Collaborating at a data level is the other direction. And you have been, one of the advocates of collaboration at that data level between the private sector, public sector, by keeping the farmer at the center. Why don't you share with the audience on how we can collaborate using data?
Thank you, Anil. Thank you for that trick question. I didn't expect that, but I'm very also fortunate that both you and Jayesh have been partners, and so really nice that both of you are on the panel and you've been partnering with me on that initiative. But look, in 30 seconds for the audience, Agri Alliance for Innovation is a volunteer-based effort. It's a collaborative effort. It's a not-for-profit think tank. And one of the things that we're trying to work on is using an Agri platform is can we build an enabling framework of data and services around a data exchange. So data exchange is actually the key aspect here. We thought we will apply to farm credit as one use case, but then you can also apply it for a second use case, which is price forecasting. I mean, Jayesh spoke about earlier, which is, the produce is thrown away on the roads because the tomato prices have crashed to 2 rupees or 3 rupees a kilo. So how do you avoid that? But the core is the data exchange. And so the challenge from an agri credit standpoint is, can I use data from 5, 10 organizations seamlessly, and I cannot stitch it together to provide better credit assessment to a financial institution, which may allow 100 million small and marginal farmers to have a better chance of raising credit. And we would be doing it using data flows in lieu of mortgaging the farm. Because as you know, most farmers don't have access to land papers, or they do not have access to a land record per se. And then the question is, can you do it within minutes, right? And then finally, and Anil spoke about it, putting the farmer in the center. So can we do it in a way that democratizes the process, and can we do it by putting the farmer in the center? So instead of the farmer having to travel by a bus to a district and chase one lender and then fill up 5 application forms, can we have the farmer remain where they are, but instead use a digital solution to try and bring that together? That's the vision. That's the approach using data. But it's a long journey, and these things are nation building efforts take years to fructify, right? And it needs everyone's effort. It's not something that we can do. We are a not-for-profit, very tiny organization, but it needs the collaboration from everyone. But Anil, if I go back to you,
just in response to that, suggestion that you have given, Nipun, I think it's not so. Not very far off where one can enable this, what you're talking about, because of this combination of bank accounts that we have, billion bank accounts, Jandan and Jam Trinity that is there. I think it's a very feasible proposition, and you're going to see solutions that is enabling credit and loans and all of that for the farmers and so on, and instant. You don't need with digital technology, with the AI and all of that powering it, is not going to be a complicated business to be able to approve of a credit or a loan or whatever. But I think I just want to make one important point, and that is you triggered a thought in me. How do we do this on a very large scale, and what is it going to incentivize private industry to really focus on agri as a sector to be invested in and to invest in, right? And I think what has been lacking in India as compared to any other country is this huge gap in private funding for research. And private funding for research can happen only when industry sees an advantage to itself. So I think there is an opportunity for incentivizing applied. I mean, we talk about CSR, but CSR is viewed as CSR in many, there are many other ways of viewing CSR. How do you instead incentivize research funded by industry? And what are the incentives you can give, tax incentives you can give to the industry if they are funding applied research, especially in certain areas of priority like agriculture or water and so on? So that is something that I think is worth taking up and developing as a policy and an incentivization strategy, so that you have a lot of private funded research. And I think that can really trigger a revolution in terms of what can be achieved.
So, Ramanathan, what you said is absolutely right. I think the time is now. I think we have enough skills and technology in the country to be able to take advantage of something like this and build it. Your point about incentivization is absolutely right. And in our head, as we build the data exchange, I think it does create new ancillary business models for the startups on the side to actually monetize the data. The effort to build a data exchange is not for profit, because I think it should be without any vested interest, right? But the benefit that it creates on the periphery is hundreds of other business models that, frankly, will hopefully free the farmer from a dependence, an over-dependence on the government, because that also is not good, right? Over-dependence on subsidy, over-dependence on loan mailers, over-dependence on loan waivers, right? Those are not things fundamentally that contribute to the health of the sector. So your point is absolutely valid, and anybody else wants to jump into that one?
No, absolutely.
Jayesh,
if I may add to that, I think that and I think I talked about at the end of the day, to do agriculture, the things that go into growing the plant are very, very critical, and we are facing all sorts of climate changes that are kind of happening that require at a base level, you need yields to change, crops to change. You need a lot of that to be less water intensive. All of that you need to be happening, drought resistance, all of it, right? Which is going to come out of some of the biotech kind of stuff that happens. And to incentivize that to happen, to have CSR money go towards making that is super critical. And the other thing that I would add is that, I think, what amazes me is the biodiversity that we sit on, right? And, the world is moving towards actually our export component of some of this, not just as a raw crop, but as a, then leveraging it and using our biotech skills that we have to create higher value adds, right? I mean, alternative proteins, Nipun, you alluded to this, right? Globally is like a happening thing, right? I mean, the projections are amazing if you talk to people who are in this space, right? Of how people who've been doing chickens for now expect they won't happen in another, 3 years. So we grow a lot of proteins, right? How does India participate in that, right? I mean, as a consumer, definitely, but how about as a producer? How do we develop the higher value stuff to participate in those new value chains that are growing of plant-based proteins, etc. here, right? So I think the research part of it is super, super important. There was a time when, our IT skills were great and we body shop those IT skills to build a lot of stuff, right? I think we also have amazing biotech skills. You see some really large companies from outside India coming to set up plants here because you have, talent to be able to do that. But I think we concertedly have to use that talent, and how do we use that talent into agriculture, right? Because that's critical. Biotech is a critical piece of agri here, and that's
Yes.
something that we don't do enough of, period.
Yes, you're right. And just in the interest of public-private partnerships in some sense, there is a software development fund that MeitY has created, Ministry of IT has created with the private sector, right? I'm sure you've heard of it. The question is, how do we take a part of that fund, or how do we ring fence a part of that fund, or ring fence a part of the Startup India Fund, as an example, of the 10,000 crores that was put aside for startups by Niti Aayog and I think DPIT, right? But how do we take a part of that and ring fence that for societal areas? Agriculture is one of them. It doesn't have to be only agriculture. Could be clean tech, could be health, could be a few other areas as well. But those would be instrumental to drive change, and to go back to the point that Ritu said, which is that how do we encourage people to go deep into those areas? Jayesh, your view, how do we build this private public? Your thoughts? Have you heard a lot of us speak about domain skills, incubation, and really getting into it? And while I think it all appears rosy, it appears positive, right? And I think we can, in a few minutes, end the panel on a positive note. But what do you think we could be doing differently?
So, on the issue of bringing the private sector into this entire innovation initiative, so three things to share. One is that it's not to say that private sector is completely detached from what is going on. In fact, when I told you earlier that 83 odd solutions were sourced, which cover the entire crop cycle. In fact, some of them were sourced from very large companies also. So earlier, Mr. Ramanathan gave the example of IBM. We had a Microsoft solution. It was a solution which had a predictive tool which can tell you what is the best time to sow the crops when the rains start. And there are a couple of others also. So private sector also is interested in kind of showcasing applications which have relevance to agriculture and multiple social sectors. But on a large scale, if you want to bring the private sector in, I guess it requires moving in a sequence. So I won't expect the private sector to jump in when practically nothing exists. You have to really take the solution to some scale before you are able to kind of interest the private sector as well. And the other very fundamental requirement, in my opinion, is that what kind of problems are you addressing? If you are addressing the most pressing problems, which again have been sourced in a very bottoms-up kind of a manner, these are the most pressing problems which farmers feel. And I completely agree with the perspective which Anil ji shared, that eventually at the end of it, the farmer has to be in the center. So if you are looking at things from his perspective, so if you ask the farmer who throws his tomatoes on the street, on the roads to find out how can he be assisted with technology, his understanding will be completely different. I mean, he will in fact blame all of us for not forewarning him that tomato prices will crash, and he was misled, so to say, just by some free fertilizers and free pesticides into growing tomatoes, which has no market today at all. So this point, some of these things which I mentioned earlier, that we are introducing this concept of regulated farming. We are looking at technology solutions in the entire crop cycle, and again addressing the most pressing problems. And then you have been referring to it, Nipun, all the time, that the solutions that we are trying to validate are being done through a very credible agency, which is our agriculture university. And the other very strong advantage is that in our state, there is a very good receiving mechanism of the farmers. So these are called in Telugu, Ritu Vedikas. So these are Vedika means a platform. So these are clusters of farmers, and for every 5,000 acres, there is an agriculture extension officer. There is a Ritu Vedika. So there is a receiving mechanism that whatever solution I want to deliver from the top also, that gets assimilated. And the agriculture university enjoys lots of credibility, because in our state, I gave you some data points about the rice production, rice productivity. These are the guys who were involved in coming out with newer varieties, which today has seen such a huge jump in the productivity and production numbers. So choosing a credible partner also, which kind of does this extension, gets the buy-in of the farmer. So once you move maybe a couple of steps or 3 steps forward, then it becomes easier to attract private sector attention. and also the attention of VCs. Rituji's report clearly pointed out that not adequate funding goes in. But I personally feel that this pandemic, this COVID year could be potentially a big game changer, because amidst all this gloom, that is one sector which has shown brightly, and obviously that has attracted everyone's attention. That in some ways has allowed the rural economy to still survive and sustain. So I see lots of optimism and hope about private sector, about VCs, governments, technology providers, all collaborating and finding useful products and solutions for our farming community.
Thank you, Jayesh. Thank you very much. Anil, any quick thoughts? We've got a few minutes left, but any quick thoughts on what you think from your perspective? Any constraints that the private sector as a startup you would face, or any parts of the ecosystem that you think we should focus on, the private sector could focus on to ramp up? I don't see Anil. Anil has dropped off. I'm sorry. So, okay, so we'll move on. But let me try and wrap up both the segments that you spoke about, which is, how do we incubate and support startups in the deep areas, and then how do we drive public-private partnerships, right? Both of them are incredibly important, I think, if we have to grow the agri sector, not just incrementally and not be happy with 50% or 100% growth, but really 5x, 10x. Hey, Anil, you're back. No, that's right. I was asking you a question. I didn't realize that you dropped off. But I was saying that, are there any quick, and we just got a minute or two, but any quick thoughts that you have on spaces that the private sector does not have access to, or you think that the government should do a little more in that space, or any other quick thoughts? Oh, wonderful, Anil, and maybe that's something that we can chew on, and we can pick it up subsequently as well, and maybe flesh it out, and with the Nudge Foundation's help, submit something back to the government to as a set of suggestions from the private sector. But let me try and wrap up what I think was a very interesting, diverse discussion on those two fundamental things. One is, how do we encourage startups to go deep into some of the areas that they're not present in at the moment? And second, how do we really collaborate between the private sector and the public sector? And in a way that expands the agri domain, right? Not just 50%, 100%, etc., but really 10x, right? I mean, I think we do need to expand to that in that manner if we are going to, take advantage of this sector's full potential. So a few points that struck me were very relevant, and I must compliment Jayesh for being so sensitive to the private sector, in fact, the fact that he says that private sector will not jump in right at the early stages. So I think there is a stage element that I think we should think about as well. And maybe there is a way where the government can support incubation and support, and through people like Ramanathan, etc., but also market access on the ground, support incubation and support pilots, dozens of pilots. Do dozens of pilots, let them fail, let them succeed, that's fine. Let's pick up the successful pilots and then let's scale them up with financial investment from venture capitals, etc. But at the same point, let me suggest in a humble way that if there was a national database of innovation where all agriculture pilots were inputted, so to speak, so the wonderful work that Jayesh is doing in Telangana would also be visible to an Assam or to some other state. The feedback that startups come up to me very often and say, we do 30 pilots before we get anywhere, because every state wants to experiment in their own way, with their own data, with their own demographics and everything else. And to some extent, that's true and that's relevant, but I think we shouldn't extend that too much. So I think that is one clear thought and idea that emerged. The second, and I will continue to expand on this, and I think everybody touched on the importance of domain. Jayesh spoke about agri universities. Ramanathan spoke about the incubators becoming now agri specific. I think there is more that we can do with curriculum on agri universities, and I think the private sector can play a role to bring in things like AI, ML, and IoT and precision farming into the curriculum for private sector, for agri universities, and then research collaboration as well. So domain is fundamentally important. Without that, it's not going to work. But really, how do we accelerate and partner together to build that domain? I think would be wonderful. There were many minor points that came out, which is too long for me to summarize. But if I had to pick up two big things that I think would make sense to take forward, would be these two, and then the policy suggestions that Anil came up with. We should work on that, right? So with that, let me thank a very wonderful panel. It was a very diverse panel, as I said, from different fields of experience, but I think we all came together collectively to try and address an issue which is incredibly complex. We have one more video that we wanted to share. I know we're out of time, but Utsav, if you're okay with it, just run the video and, would you think it's okay, Utsav, or do you think we're
Yes. Thank you so much, Nipun, and I thank you all the panelists actually on behalf of the Nudge Foundation to actually come together and have a very insightful discussion. What I will request is my colleague will play this video from Digital Green, which focuses on peer-to-peer learning in farming communities. And that's a very innovative model, which I believe our audience should see. And post this video, we will move on to our next session. Thank you so much. Over to this video.
Thank you, Utsav. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've all experienced it. On one of my first trips to a village in rural India, children would congregate in front of my camera. Folks would peer into the few homes that had a television set, and a long line gathered in front of the village's only payphone. In less than a decade, smartphones that pack inbuilt cameras and social media apps have taken over much of that functionality, and costs have plummeted. The mobile revolution is well understood, and accelerated by the pandemic, India now has more rural internet users than urban. At the same time, a recent study found more than 75% of farms that were bigger than 200 hectares had high-speed 3G or 4G connectivity, while less than 30% of farmers that had 1 hectare of land did. We need to go beyond seeing digital technologies as a silver bullet. India's green revolution powered increases in rice and wheat yield through agricultural technologies like improved seeds and fertilizers, but were most successful in irrigated parts of the country. Digital technologies need to be contextualized to land on similarly fertile soil as well. Food systems are highly decentralized and are likely to deconcentrate even further as countries seek to boost the resilience of their national food security in the post-COVID era. We also need to be wary of the inequities that technology itself can exacerbate, particularly when powerful interests capture its value and its data for themselves. To share an example, at Digital Green, we work with India's National Rural Livelihood Mission, Ajivika, to use peer-to-peer videos that are by and for farmers to share best practices. As we do so, the government's village resource persons collect data on what videos individual farmers watch and what practices they ultimately apply on their farms. What if farmers themselves were able to access this data that had been collected on their behalf and decided whether they wanted to share that data with a bank for credit scoring purposes or with an offtake buyer who might offer them a higher price with increased traceability? As the agriculture and telecom sectors continue to liberalize and expand, we're co-creating a protocol, a digital farm stack that can serve as the rails for countless applications across the value chain that we can't even begin to imagine, from a growing ecosystem of government, NGO, and agri-tech startups, and be inclusive of both those big and small. I'm personally most looking forward to seeing the ideas that the farmers themselves come up with as they gain greater agency. FarmStack can serve as an open source architecture to codify governance policies and interoperability standards that can provide the necessary safeguards to protect the interests of farmers and the organizations that work with them alike. This will enable a wide variety of systems to talk to one another and seamlessly coordinate. I want to thank the Nudge for inviting me to share this vision with you today, and I hope you'll join us in developing it together. Thank you.